Who are the best governors for the state of North Dakota? Chad and I cover politics on Plain Talk constantly, but we're always talking about the politics of the moment. And we don't always spend a lot of time talking about how we got here and the leaders who brought us here. And we thought it would be kind of fun to discuss who our favorite governors from history are. Current governor excluded because he's only been governor less than a year. So nobody can pick Kelly Armstrong. But every other governor in the history of North Dakota is in play. Chad and I both have some picks for our top three. And Chad, do you want to go first?
Well, now, Rob, you introduced this as favorite governor. It's my understanding it's the three most consequential governors
You're correct, and
moving forward.
I will say that's also, although one of them's a very good favorite of mine, but also I think I came at this from the perspective of consequential as well.
Yeah, and that's how I came about it. Like, I thought about today's life, and then I thought about what governors had the biggest effect on where we're sitting right now. And before I get into number three, I'm going to start with my honorable mentions: Ed Schaefer, George Sinner, Bill Guy, John Burke. Okay, so those are the other ones that I was considering. My number three is, and you'll find two of my three were actually removed from office, which I don't know what that says about me, but my first one is Wild Bill Langer, who was governor between 1937 and 1939 before he was removed for some scandals and got elected to the U.S. Senate. But the reason why I chose him is I think a real leader in the anti railroad monopolies, really started the populist firebrand that we still see in North Dakota to this day on both sides. And it at times drives both of us crazy. But I really think him standing up for farmers and ranchers as they're being foreclosed really set that populist sort of politics as part of our political DNA.
My number three is actually related to your number three because I chose Ole H. Olson, who was lieutenant governor to Bill Langer, and who wasn't even governor. He was governor for less than a year. He was sworn in after the state Supreme Court removed Langer from office over corruption charges. Now, I know later on those corruption charges were dismissed. I'm sorry, Bill Langer was corrupt as hell. Um, but Ole Olsen, and the reason I picked him, and I was thinking of it kind of, I mean, to the extent that you said that Langer was an embodiment of sort of the beginning of the populist era, which and then I'm thinking, well, January 6th, right? Like the most pure expression of populist rage. Well, back in the 1930s, in 1934, when Langer was removed from office, his supporters marched on the state capitol. Olson had to call out the National Guard to protect things. So to me, I'm thinking, what would have happened if Olson, who remember at one point was Langer's running mate, what had happened if he had acquiesced to that? Where would we be as a state if he had acquiesced to Langer's, march? Now, obviously, the voters ultimately put him back in power again later on, but I feel like that was kind of an important moment in the terms of in the rule of law for North Dakota. And Ole Olson, although his tenure in elected office, at least statewide elected office, was brief, took a pretty tough stand, and I think that was important.
I think your point is such an interesting one comparing it to January 6th, because like Bill Langer, Donald Trump got reelected into power, even though
Yeah.
there was some corruption issues and that kind of thing. All right, my number two is a little more modern. Governor Art Link, governor first elected in 72, reelected in 76, and then lost in 1980. And his, to me, has all to do with energy development. I think what we're seeing in North Dakota and the balance between conservation and getting the stuff out of the ground was really set forth by Governor Link when the landscape is quiet again. His speech, which is often looked upon as making sure, hey, we're going to pull this coal out, but we want to make sure that that land is still good for farming and ranching. I think North Dakota's done a really, really good job of balancing our interests in extracting energy and also making sure the landscape is good, and that's because of Governor Art Link.
Art Link sometimes gets cited by Democrats who I would characterize as being opponents of energy development in our state, and he gets cited kind of justifying them. And I think that's a misinterpretation of his
He was
legacy.
not anti-energy.
I think the most important word that you used in describing him was balance. In Yes, we want to get these resources and we want to use them. We also want to do it the right way. And I think that approach, which I think still permeates North Dakota's approach to this day, has made our state more resilient to some of the federal, attempts to block energy development. I think it's really hard to come into North Dakota and say that we've done just coal mining specifically, has done coal mining irresponsibly. When you look at the way the land's been reclaimed, it's put back into use. We have a really good partnership between the state and the coal industry, and I think a lot of that has its roots in Art Lake, a modern, doing it the right way.
Very much a
Um,
modern.
I chose John Burke, and maybe that's kind of an obvious one for number two. Hugely important though. Um, in early on, I mean, not right at statehood. He came probably about a generation after statehood. But there's a reason why there's a statue of him at the state capitol. There's a statue. I don't know. Is he still in this? Is the statuary? I know they made some changes to the statuary in
I don't
Congress,
know. Yeah.
but he used to be North Dakota's representation in Congress. Um, and just when you think about like the things that government does, or is supposed to do, I mean, a lot of this stuff is boring, but hugely important. I mean, he enacted pure food, seed, and sanitation laws. He established the first state public health laboratory. Um, he did work on seed grain for farmers. It just he started the tuberculosis sanitarium, which probably most modern North Dakotans know from the Ghost Hunter show. Um, but it's not there anymore. But he did a lot of it. He established child labor laws. He created the State Employee Compensation Commission. He established a juvenile court system. I mean, hugely consequential things, not very sexy things, but very, very important. So to me, John Burke's number two.
Yeah, like I mentioned, he was on my honorable mention list because of all those things you went through. I would add in anti-corruption legislation as well, and everything I read about him. Honest John, right? I mean, everybody
Yeah.
lusted him. He was like some of the people, not Art Link, but the other two I'm talking about, seemed to be kind of scoundrels. That was not Governor Burke.
I don't
Um,
think Ole Olson was a scoundrel.
yeah, I
Um,
don't know enough about him, but certainly I just want to make sure Art Link,
sure.
the opposite of a scoundrel.
Yeah.
So my number one is Governor Lynn Frazier. He was in office and signed into law the Bank of North Dakota, the state mill. I think both of those institutions are still so consequential in the success of our state. I mean, even the work that Governor Armstrong did in terms of low interest loans for federal workers, it's not happening if we don't have a Bank of North Dakota. He again was recalled, the first governor who was ever recalled. He was an NPLer who helped put into effect the recall law that was then used against him to recall him when things weren't going so great. But again, like Langer, he was then elected to the U.S. Senate for 18 years. So I think part of it might have just been timing, that he was the guy who signed into law those very consequential things that are still here. But he's my number one just because I think the Bank of North Dakota and the state mill are so, so important to our state's success.
Um, yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. I mean, those institutions are, I mean, not only, I mean, so unique to North Dakota. Um, and I mean, it's just hard to argue with that. My last one, I chose Mr. Edward T. Schaefer. And
I'm not
for a
surprised
couple of
by that.
reasons.
I'm not surprised.
For a couple of reasons. One is he really he brought Republicans back. They were in a rough spot for a while there when George Sinner and they went through a rough stretch there. He brought him back, and he brought him back with kind of a happy warrior, right? And it's such a contrast to where Republicans are at now. But this past, 3+ decades of political dominance in North Dakota really began with Ed Shaper. But even beyond that, like if we want to talk about policy, we could talk about the flooding and stuff in 1997. He guided the state through that. But something I think that he doesn't get a lot of credit for, that's still paying dividends today, is his work on rural internet access. And I think the ways that this is paying dividends is, one, North Dakota consistently punches above its weight when you look at things like internet speed and internet infrastructure. Ed Schaefer was ahead of the curve on that stuff. You would think for a state that's as rural and as spread out as North Dakota is, that we'd have terrible connectivity. It's not true. We have actually very strong connectivity, and in many ways has been a boon to our efforts to try to diversify the state's economies. Part of me wonders how much that's contributing even now to these data centers coming in. Ultimately, that data is relying on some infrastructure that probably had its roots in the Ed Schaefer era. So and also, during the pandemic, how reliant we all became on that infrastructure, but also, in some ways, we could all tell the story about North Dakota's small communities dying. I would argue that those communities have been kept somewhat more alive in the internet era because it's possible for them to have that connectivity in the rural areas and stay right where they're at, but yet still have that digital access that a lot of us enjoy. So I just when I was thinking about this, and I don't know, reading these, Matt wanted this to go 3-1, and I don't know that mine are in any particular order.
Yeah.
And probably some of it, I mean, I know Ed personally, and I liked Ed personally, so I'm a little bit biased, but I really think his legacy matters a lot. Particularly, I think it gets overlooked, but the rural internet stuff that he did was way ahead of its time.
Yeah, I mentioned Ed Schaefer as one of my our honorable mentions, and I think, frankly, if we would have done this list 2 or 3 years ago, he probably would have been on my top 3 because of the way he shifted the politics in North Dakota between 1990 and 2020. I mean, those 30 plus years, it was because of Ed
And
Schaefer.
and by the way, I don't think Ed Schaefer deserves any blame for the stuff
No,
that's happening now. I mean,
no,
his
but I just
movement,
think,
yeah.
like, sort of like I mentioned with Bill Langer, we're seeing that now with the populist stuff. During that window of time, what we saw is that happy warrior, pro-business Republican that sort of took over the state from the Democrats. That's because of Ed Schaefer. I mean, it was because of Ed Schaefer. Super, super consequential. And I think that's a pretty good pick.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Those are our top three. North Dakota history, fascinating, fascinating stuff. Our state is a land of not just meteorological extremes, but at times political extremes too. We have a very colorful political history. So if you ever want to dig into that, there's a lot of fun stuff back there.
Rob,
Thanks.
this is the most fun I've had doing a homework assignment. So thanks for the
Yeah,
assignment, Matt. This was good stuff.
a lot of fun. Thanks for listening.